how old can we date the Masoretic Hebrew Old Bible, the Old Testament? When does it start showing up in the sources? People think that, the people think that Moses wrote the Torah in the Bronze Age. Some people say 1300 BC. Moses started writing the Torah, and it's been passed down since then. And then new books are added or whatever. That's nonsense. Nonsense. In fact, when Israel got conquered by the Assyrians, by Nebuchadnezzar in 597 BCE, most of the Jews were brought to Babylon. Everyone knows this story. It's famous. The fall of the first temple, right? But what we found out later is that a lot of Jews went back into Egypt. And it was like an exodus backwards. And they settled in this city called Elephantine. So Elephantine is a city of an ancient Jewish city in Egypt that dates, we have texts from that period from archaeology. We dug up papyri, thousands of papyri. So we know what they believed in. We know what their ideas were. There is no Moses. There is no Noah. There's no David. There's no mention of Abraham. Nothing. And they're worshiping multiple gods. So wait a minute. If the Torah already existed before Nebuchadnezzar in 597 BCE, wouldn't these Jews in Elephantine have Moses and Abraham and Noah in these texts? They'd have zero. We have thousands of texts from this place. No, not one mention of Abraham. Not one mention of Moses. How does that make sense?
Where did it come from then?
Well, like Amon points out, like I've been pointing out, like Russell Gomurkin been pointing out, these texts are written way later.
Yeah.
And they're just backdating themselves, which is common. This happens all the time. It happens in Greek sources, the Sibylline oracles. They backdate themselves. They'll say, this is a text from 10,000 years ago. Like, this happens all the time. This is not some random thing. That's Elephantine. That's where they're settled. And they dug up thousands of papyri and inscriptions. And they have Yahweh. They call him Yahoo. It's a different spelling of the way Yahweh, but he's there. So it is the Jews, and they're writing in Aramaic.
And sorry, remind me again what year this is?
They fled Israel in 597 BCE.
597 BC.
So between 597 and 410, that's a long time. It's 200 years, right?
Yeah.
We have texts that are dating between 597 and 410 from that city, dating texts from that period.
Papyri
and
scrolls?
None of them mention Abraham, Moses, or Noah.
And when were Moses and Noah supposed to have lived?
Way before that.
Way before that.
We're talking
Noah's
2,000 years before that.
2,000 years before that.
Moses would be almost 1,000 years, 800 years before that.
And when did the very first writings of Noah and these guys?
The first. Okay, this is a great question. We can't say when's the first time it was ever written down, but we can say if there's anybody who ever mentions Moses, who's the first one to do it outside of the text that's claiming, that you can't date the text with the text, right?
Right.
You got to use an outside text. Who cites this text? Who's mentioning this text? You want to know the first time it's ever mentioned?
When?
Hecataeus of Abdera in around 320 BC. First time Moses is ever mentioned. He writes a text about Abraham. He writes a text about Moses and Noah. It's Hecataeus of Abdera. That's his name. A guy named Berosus. A guy named Manetho. These guys they're all contemporaries with each other. Late 4th century BC, early 3rd century BC, you start hearing about Moses, Abraham, and Noah.
Wow.
Before that, nobody mentions them.
What the dude?
And for some reason, in Bible scholarship land, they don't talk about this. They know this is true. They won't deny it. They can't argue against it. But they'll say, there's probably an oral tradition, man. Calm down. And I'll say, well, what about Elephantine? There are all these texts there from 200-year period.
Right.
And there was probably a fringe sect. That's what they'll say.
When was the Dead Sea Scrolls conventionally? What is the conventional idea when they were written?
First century BC.
First century BC.
Yeah, so that's way later. You can't use that, yeah.
But those are all in Hebrew?
No, there's Greek ones.
There's some in Greek, too.
There's some Greek, yeah.
And I believe Amon was claiming that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls came from Greek.
Yeah, so there's some, I can't really talk too much about this. I don't know too much, but I've heard for that. It looks like the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them were translating from the Greek side. So the ones that we found, and I'm not going to die on this hill. I could be wrong.
Right.
But there are people who say that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls looks like it's coming from the Greek tradition. So, and by the way, in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because in the Greek Septuagint, Yahweh, which is the Greek way to spell Yahweh, there is no Yahweh in the Septuagint, but in the Greek manuscripts from Dead Sea Scrolls, the Yahweh is in there. And people,
when did the Septuagint come about?
Well, the oldest ones we have is from 325 AD.
325.
So anything could have changed between 300. Well, they say it's like 270 BC when the Septuagint got produced or translated or whatever.
Right.
And I'm fine with if the academics are if the experts are saying it's a translation, I don't care. Fine. All I'm saying is there's no. It could be. It's fine. It's a translation all day. I don't care. All I care about is when was it written, and to me, there's no evidence that any of the Hebrew or the Greek shows up before the 4th century BC.
Wow.
And that word Yahweh in Greek shows up in the oldest manuscripts from the Dead Sea region, but in the Church Bible, the Old Testament in Greek, the Septuagint, the Codex Sinaiticus, the Codex Vaticanus, and the Codex Alexandricus. Those 3 church Bibles they changed the name Yahweh to Kyrios, which means Lord in Greek. So the Lord. That's why the Bible always says the Lord instead of Yahweh. Mm-hmm. But in the oldest manuscripts, Yahweh is present. We have a Deuteronomy manuscript from Dead Sea, and it says it's got the 3 letters iota, alpha, omega, Yahweh. And by the way, I think I know why they changed it, because the Yahweh is actually an old name for Dionysus.
Really?
Yes. Dionysus has the same name as Yahweh. And get this, Plutarch, who wrote in the 2nd century, says that he has a whole text called which god is worshipped by the Jews? And he says it's Dionysus.
Dionysus.
He said it's some Eastern form of Dionysus, because Dionysus wasn't just a wine god. That's like an attribute attributed to him. And then when the Romans adopt Dionysus, the Roman version of Dionysus, he becomes this wine party god. But if you go back, the oldest forms of Dionysus you could find, he's way more than that. He's a god of life. He's a god of the growing of the crops. He's a god of Bacchic. It's called Bacchic mania, but it's like divine inspiration.
Wasn't he the son of Zeus?
He's the son of Zeus. He's the heir of heaven.
Right.
He was born from the marriage between Persephone, who's the queen of the underworld, and Zeus.
Right.
And in that text, he's the heir to. He's no other son of God, not Hercules, not Apollo. Only Dionysus is called the heir to heaven. That's it. Only one time. It's only Dionysus.
And he was Yahweh,
according to Plutarch. Because they both have, in the oldest texts of Dionysus, like there are sources of the Chaldean oracles is one. His name is Yahweh in Greek, which is the same way you spell Yahweh in Greek. They have the same exact name.